Among the 4 gates to the Forbidden City, compared with the other 3, the East Flowery Gate is distinctive. The gate has only 8 rows of round-headed decorations, while the other 3 gates have 9 rows. As small a difference as this may seem, somewhat more than 480 years ago, the seemingly slight variation led to trouble that shocked both the imperial court and the common people alike. In the 3rd lunar month of 1521, Emperor Wuzong of the Ming dynasty died, leaving behind neither son nor brother, and so the Empress Dowager decided that the Prince of Hubei, Zhu Houtong, should succeed to the throne. But when Zhu Houtong was about to reach the gate of military virtue, on his way to take up the throne, he suddenly stopped. Why had Zhu Houtong halted just as he was about to ascend the throne? What had made him so hesitant? As custom dictated, Zhu Houtong was supposed to enter the Forbidden City through East Flowery Gate and then make his way to the Hall of Literary Glory, where he would be formally identified as the Crown Prince before succeeding to the throne. However, there were only 8 rows of round-headed decorations on East Flowery Gate, and so it was considered inferior to Meridian Gate, the Gate of Divine Prowess, and West Flowery Gate. Moreover, East Flowery Gate was close to the Hall of Literary Glory where the Crown Prince had lived, but the Emperor almost never passed by this area. Zhu Houtong rejected the request of the Ministry of Rites to enter the Forbidden City through East Flowery Gate, and insisted that he had come to ascend the throne and could not enter the palace as a crown prince. The Empress Dowager worked on a compromise reminding officials that the throne could not be left vacant for long, and that all the officials should leave the city and somehow persuade Zhu Houtong to enter the palace. At noon on the 28th day of the 4th lunar month, Zhu Houtong entered the imperial palace through the gate of Great Ming and stepped onto the imperial path before ascending the throne. Jia Jin became the title of his reign. In this dispute, the ministers had dared to contend with the man on his way to the throne, while at the same time Zhu Houtong had adhered to his own opinion, running the risk of losing the throne in the process. But had the ministers really taken the stance simply for the sake of a ritual? Was there some secret behind the ritual? And if so, what? It was 1661, the 7th day of the 1st lunar month in the 18th year of the reign of Shunju, and the 24-year-old emperor had died. In his last testament, he had written that his 8-year-old son Xuanye should succeed to the throne. 2 days later, Xuanye was enthroned during a grand ceremony of enthronement, the most important ceremony in the Forbidden City, and one that took place on only 20 occasions over a period of 500 years. At the time Emperor Shunju was enthroned, the Ming dynasty had only recently come to an end, and many parts of the Forbidden City were still in ruins. For this reason, the ceremony was held at the Gate of Supreme Harmony and not in the Hall of Supreme Harmony as tradition called for. When Xuanye ascended the throne, the country was stable and it was possible to hold a regular ceremony of enthronement. But the protocol officials had to make arrangements for the procedure of the ceremony, the Imperial Guard of Honor, and the positions to be allocated to those attending the ceremony. Details of such a ceremony could be found in the archives of past dynasties. In the case of a change of dynasty, the major procedures in the ceremony would remain almost the same with the exception of garments. For protocol officials of the Qing dynasty, laws and regulations of the Ming dynasty served as the best reference standard, and today when we try to recreate a ceremony of enthronement as held during the Qing dynasty, we can find important clues in laws and regulations of the Qing dynasty. Before the enthronement, the emperor himself or officials he appointed would go to the Temple of Heaven, the Altar of Earth, the Imperial Ancestral Temple, and the Altar of Land and Grain to report to Heaven, Earth, and the Imperial Ancestors. On the day of enthronement itself, Imperial guards would be found standing at every gate of the Forbidden City. Before daybreak, princes and ministers would be busy putting on their court dress before entering the Forbidden City. An imperial carriage, 2 imperial music orchestras, banners and flags, canopies, and a guard of honor were scattered around the Gate of Supreme Harmony and the Hall of Supreme Harmony. All the doors in the Hall of Supreme Harmony were opened. The Secretary of the Grand Council and officials from the Ministry of Rites entered the hall and placed the Imperial Edict of Enthronement, congratulatory notes and writing tools on tables. The most special of these was the Imperial Jade Seal, which was placed on a table to the south of the throne. And so 8-year-old Xuanyu, in a white mourning dress, knelt 3 times with his head touching the ground 9 times before his father's memorial tablets. Next, he put on a ceremonial garment before making his way to the palace of the Empress Dowager, where he greeted her in a most solemn manner. The curtain over the middle gate of the Palace of Heavenly Purity was pulled down, and this indicated that the funeral ceremony for the deceased emperor was now suspended. At daybreak, the emperor went out of the left side of the Gate of Heavenly Purity for the Hall of Central Harmony, where he sat on the throne. Officials directing the ceremony greeted the emperor in the most solemn manner. But then after this, they would no longer have to follow ritual and could concentrate on their duties. Xuanyu sat on the throne in the Hall of Supreme Harmony and remained as emperor for the next 61 years. Today, it is rather difficult to recreate the Forbidden City's most important ceremony. None of the court paintings include this subject. Under the guidance of experts, however, we can get a fairly good idea from paintings of other ceremonies preserved in the Palace Museum in order to recreate some feeling of the enthronement of an emperor. enthronement was solemn but quiet, as the funeral of the deceased emperor was still underway, and so although the instruments of imperial music were on display, they were not played. But when these instruments were played, it was certainly for a very important ceremony in the Forbidden City. Every year, 3 highly important ceremonies took place in the Forbidden City. On the first day of the first lunar month each year, princes, ministers, and foreign envoys would come to pay tribute to the emperor. The rituals were similar to the grand ceremony of enthronement, but the atmosphere was more festive. The emperor's birthday was a national festival for which the capital's craftsmen decorated the main streets with coloured paintings, bright cloth and other decorations. Everywhere, people would be seen singing and dancing to extol the good times, and throughout the country, civil and military officials exercised great courtesy in the direction of the capital. The winter solstice was the time set aside for another great festival in the Forbidden City. On this day, sunlight could reach the innermost part of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. On the winter solstice of 2004, special techniques were used to videotape this most rare event seen in the hall just once a year. On this day, sunlight was reflected onto the horizontal inscribed board in the center of the hall. The norms concerning rituals in China can be traced back to the Zhou dynasty about 3,000 years ago. In Duties of the Minister of Rites, a section of The Ritual of Zhou, rites were divided into 5 categories and applied to both the Son of Heaven and the common people. The buildings in the Forbidden City were used to standardize the norms of ritual. It is perhaps not difficult to imagine how a foreign envoy would have felt as he crossed Tiananmen Square, past the gateway of the Tiananmen Tower, and then stepped onto the passageway in front of Meridian Gate before entering the Forbidden City to attend the grand ceremony for the first time. After entering the Forbidden City through a side gateway of Meridian Gate, he would have passed the Gate of Supreme Harmony, from where he would have seen a very broad square with the awe-inspiring Hall of Supreme Harmony at the other end of the square. Passing Meridian Gate along the Imperial Path was the privilege of the emperor and of the empress only on the day she was married to the emperor. However, this rule was broken at an interval of every few years. The third lunar month in spring was the season in which good wishes were expressed, and it was also at this time that some scholars, having passed all the levels of the relevant examinations, would be able to fulfill their lifelong wishes of entering the Forbidden City. The palace examination, held once every 3 years, was the final imperial examination in ancient China. All candidates qualified for the examination in the Forbidden City had already obtained the title Past Scholars, those who had passed the metropolitan examination. When they attended the palace examination, they felt greatly honored as disciples of the emperor. This is a palace examination paper from the Qianlong period. The examinee completed his essay, which had a title specified by the emperor, and the paper was then handed in before sunset, as was the requirement. The top of the paper provides details of the examinee's name, age, native place, father's name, grandfather's name, his status, and his records of civil examinations. A palace examination grading official selected the 10 best papers and submitted these to the emperor for his final decision. The palace examinations held during the Ming and Qing dynasties before 1790 took place on the square in front of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, but during the Qianlong period the same examinations were held in this hall to show the emperor's care for the candidates. The final result of the palace examination was made public 5 days after it was held. In the number 1 historical archives we found this list of successful candidates in the last palace examination in Chinese history, attended by 273 examinees in 1904. The names of famous figures such as Tan Yankai and Shen Junru were on the list, and out of all of them, Liu Chunlin came out top in the examination. The announcement of the list of successful candidates in the palace examination was an important ceremony held in the Forbidden City. Miao Tung, who came first in the palace examination in the 6th year of the Kangxi period, described the scene in his diary. It was a bit cold that day. Before dawn, I, along with other successful candidates, knelt on the ground in front of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. On the previous day, I had heard rumors about the names of the top 3 successful candidates. I thought my prospects were hopeless. When the list of successful candidates was announced, I heard I was the top 1. A protocol official dragged me out of the line. Then I, along with the 2 other top successful candidates, followed the protocol official out of the palace through the middle gateway of Meridian Gate. The 3 lucky scholars took the passageway that was for the exclusive use of the emperor and empress and left the Forbidden City through the middle gateway of Meridian Gate. This was certainly the walk dreamed of by scholars in ancient China. At the same time as scholars were going through the trial of the palace examination, Chinese farmers were experiencing the busiest season of the year. This series of paintings depicts farmers toiling in different seasons, but while the middle-aged man portrayed in each of the paintings may look like an ordinary farmer, he was in fact Yin Jian, the fourth son of Emperor Kangxi, and his wife and children were even portrayed in the painting farming and weaving. It was well known to everybody that Emperor Kangxi attached great importance to farming and sericulture. Undoubtedly, he was very happy to see this series of paintings. Yin Jian was so adept at scheming that he defeated his rivals for the throne and became Emperor Yongzheng. But like his father, Emperor Kangxi, he also cared about agriculture. From the notes of Emperor Yongzheng's daily life, we find that he worked as a farmer for one day every year. In the middle of the second lunar month of the 6th year of the Yongzheng period, farmers all over the country would be about to start their farming season, and so on the 18th day of the month a great many people came to the altar of the god of agriculture, where over 100 hectares of land had been opened up to the southeast of the altar. After offering sacrifices to the altar, the emperor would till a piece of land to set an example for farmers across the country. He put one hand to the plough and carried a whip in the other hand. As required by the ritual, the emperor should push the plough 3 times, but Emperor Yongzheng pushed it once more. It was believed that the rise and fall of this agricultural country depended on the grace of heaven, and so, because he claimed to be the son of heaven, the emperor needed to receive the grace of heaven. The downside of this was that if heaven did not play along and trouble resulted, the emperor should be the first to be punished. The emperor was duty-bound to enter into a dialogue with heaven through sacrificial activities. The emperors attached the utmost importance to these sacrificial activities and observed stringent rules pertaining to their ceremonial garments. Sacrificial rites in the imperial palace were divided into 80 types in 3 categories: major rites, medium rites, and group rites. Major rites were performed by the emperor himself. Medium rites were observed partly by the emperor, but mostly by his ministers, and group rites were attended entirely by officials. After the Manchu ruler from outside Shanhai, Guan Pass, became the new master of the Forbidden City, he introduced a new sacrificial activity. Sacrifices were frequently offered to deities in the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, but the new master of the Forbidden City turned the sleeping palace of the empress of the previous dynasty into a site for offering sacrifices to deities. A portrait of Lord Guan, also known as the God of War, can still be seen in the Palace of Earthly Tranquility. Officers and men of the Eight Banners regarded him as their patron saint and offered sacrifices to him before every battle. The ceremony of offering sacrifices to deities of the Manchu and Mongol ethnic groups used to begin at 4 p.m. and lasted for the entire night. This was a ceremony that had been handed down from primitive shamanism by the ancestors of the Qing imperial family. During the Qing dynasty, tools for making cakes were placed in front of a small room in the northeastern corner of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility. In this small room, 3 cauldrons stood on a kitchen range, and before each ceremony a pig was slaughtered and cooked in clear water before being offered to the deities. After the ceremony, the emperor would share the pork with princes and ministers. As required by the ritual, the pork was not seasoned in any way, resulting in a taste that was disappointing. So to remedy this, some of the princes and ministers hid salt in their long sleeves to sprinkle on the flavorless pork. Emperors of all the dynasties in ancient China worshipped heaven, their ancestors, and all things on earth. But more importantly, they prayed for their perpetual rule of the country. However, their prayers could not guarantee eternity to their dynasties. At a time when the Ming dynasty was tottering due to natural disasters and the chaos of war, a new force was emerging in the area between the Changbai Mountains and the Heilongjiang River in northeast China. Nu'ar Ha-Chu and his 8 Banners armies subjugated the Ming Empire. But when his grandson took the throne in the Forbidden City, he was faced with a mature civilization of considerable force. Shortly afterwards, the new master of the Forbidden City found himself blending as one with this civilization that had a long history of tradition. The rites that had been followed for thousands of years served as pillars of the new Qing dynasty, and the decrees and regulations it promulgated were able to be as complete and intricate as those of the previous dynasties. Ceremonies held in the Forbidden City in the past, however, had never been as solemn and as impressive as those of the new Qing dynasty. In 1793, when Emperor Qianlong began the 58th year of his reign, in what was truly the flourishing age of the Qing dynasty, he was so pleased with his achievements that he referred to himself as an old man perfect in every way, and preparations were being made for his 83rd birthday celebrations. The Longevity Festival was one of the 3 major festivals of the country, and even envoys from other Asian and European countries came to extend congratulations to the Chinese emperor. But this time, a group of foreign guests were to challenge the norms of etiquette that had been followed in China for thousands of years. In the summer of 1793, a fleet from Britain sailed into Dinghai Harbour in the Zhoushan archipelago. A diplomatic mission led by George Macartney, the special envoy of King George III, had come to China in the name of extending congratulations on Emperor Qianlong's birthday. In their diaries, members of the British mission wrote about their first impressions of China. These paintings, executed by W. Alexander, an artist accompanying the mission, captured these scenes of China of 1793. The highest house has only 2 stories, and their roofs are marked by beautiful curves, but no facilities were installed to guard against wild animals and thieves and robbers. It must be safe in this country. Everywhere, people are surprisingly busy. There are no idlers in China, and not a single beggar can be seen. Thousands of poor people carried on their shoulders things that cannot be carried by vehicles. Since their childhood, the Chinese have been taught to be amicable and polite. The old live with the young in the same family. Every family keeps a family tree, and the ancestors' examples are often cited. Members of the same clan pay their ancestors' tombs at least once a year, and they visit each other from time to time. The uncle tells the nephew not to be too courteous among family members. The British, however, were puzzled by a custom that was very common in China at the time. Chief British envoy George Macartney wrote, "A Chinese navigator and some of his compatriots boarded the ship to help us. Curiously, they visited all the facilities in the ship. They knelt down as soon as they saw the Emperor's portrait in the reception room and respectfully kowtowed over and over again. The portrait had been brought back to Britain by a merchant over 20 years before. It was very interesting that a doctor who had been to China told me that an ambassador had to kneel down 3 times and kowtow 9 times in front of the Chinese emperor. I would not do so for the sake of Britain's honour." The British were prepared to go down on both knees only in front of God, and they could not understand what the kowtow meant in Chinese rites. Emperor Qianlong was unhappy when he learned that the members of the British mission would be refusing to kneel down in front of him. He ordered a minister to teach the British how to kowtow. Every foreign diplomatic envoy to China was required to learn to kowtow, but this new envoy was not to be an obedient student. Instead, he had come from Britain, a place that claimed to be the overlord of the world. George George Macartney had brought with him products representing the most sophisticated science and technology in Britain, and he hoped that the Chinese would not only be interested, but also buy huge quantities of these products. He believed, wrongly, that the dispute over rights was unimportant. Emperor Qianlong drew the following conclusion. They know nothing about protocol. The ignorant foreigners do not deserve a courteous reception. The articles of tribute from Britain shall be accepted since they have been delivered from afar with sincerity. But in fact, my celestial empire boasts all sorts of things, so it is unnecessary to buy goods from that country. George Macartney had failed to open up the market in China he had hoped for. He had instead spent all his time totally occupied with matters of protocol and never once got the chance to speak of the goal of his journey. The gifts from Britain were placed in the imperial gardens where, dozens of years later, they were found by the British-French Allied forces when they occupied Yuan Garden. All the cannons, guns, shells and bullets had remained intact, the Chinese having never shown any interest in touching them. In early February 1796, on the eve of Chinese New Year, Emperor Qianlong received another letter from King George III of Britain, who hoped to expand trade relations between the two countries. But yet again, Emperor Qianlong turned down the request. Instead, he signed his last edict as emperor. On the next day, he would abdicate in favor of one of his sons to fulfill the promise he had made upon his enthronement 60 years before. On September the 3rd, 1735, 10 days after the death of Emperor Yongzheng, Emperor Qianlong had succeeded to the throne. At the time, he took an oath in front of the memorial tablets of his ancestors. Among the previous emperors, Kangxi reigned for 61 years. If I have the same opportunity under the care of heaven, I won't dare to surpass my ancestor, and I will abdicate in favor of my son after I have reigned for 60 years. Now the need to fulfill his oath was becoming a reality. On the eve of his abdication, Emperor Qianlong composed a poem to express his multitude of feelings. Some of the lines are as follows. Today is the last day of the reign of Qianlong, and tomorrow will be the beginning of the reign of Jia Qing. I am lucky enough to have reigned for 60 years. When he abdicated in 1796, Emperor Qianlong had every reason to be proud of himself. He said, "The state policy of giving first priority to farming and sericulture has made 1/3 of the world's population self-sufficient, and both the imperial family and the common people scrupulously abide by their duties. Isn't this the prosperous age the Chinese have dreamed of for so many centuries? I would like to ask if there is any country more stable and rational than China. Is there any force in the world that can be on an equal footing with me?" In early 1796, on Lunar New Year's Day, a grand ceremony was held in the Forbidden City in which Tianlong abdicated in favor of Jia Qing. Tianlong said at the time that it was a great event, unprecedented through the ages. At the time the Masters of the Forbidden City were celebrating that great event, George Macartney, who had returned to Europe 3 years before, smashed the image of the Chinese Empire that had been cherished by Westerners for centuries. He said, "The Chinese Empire is only an old, worn-out ship, but fortunately some cautious captains have protected it from sinking in nearly 150 years. The gigantic hull scares its neighbouring countries. If a good-for-nothing serves as the steersman, discipline and safety will be out of the question on the ship. It will not sink immediately. Like a wreck, it will drift everywhere until it is dashed to pieces against the coast." While people on China's side of the globe had created the myth of governing a country by rights, on the other side of the globe this myth had already been perceived as a bubble that might burst at any moment. The age of grand ceremonies in the Forbidden City was coming to an end. The outcome of the war was almost certain, and a change in dynastic rule was underway. In the 8th lunar month of 1644, a 6-year-old boy and his mother, accompanied by a large entourage, left the boy's birthplace, Shangjing, today's Shenyang, for Beijing. The name of the boy was Fu Lin, and he was Emperor Shunzhi of the Qing dynasty, and the destination of this journey was their new home in Beijing, the Forbidden City. high gate, which the young Emperor Shunzhi had never seen before, must have made a deep and novel impression on the 6-year-old. It is the largest gate in the Forbidden City, and it is 37.95 meters high. According to the theory of yin and yang in China, direct north is called Zi, while direct south is Wu. So this gate to the south of the central axis of the Forbidden City was called Wu Men, Meridian Gate. When he passed through Meridian Gate, Emperor Shunzhi saw the real Forbidden City. This was to be his new home, and becoming the Forbidden City's occupant symbolized being the new ruler of China. The most eye-catching characteristics of this palace are its crimson walls and golden glazed roof tiles, and this stretching red and gold sets the Forbidden City apart from the buildings surrounding it. The Forbidden City consisted of two parts, the front palace and the inner palace. In the front palace, the emperor handled court affairs and held major ceremonial activities. And in the inner palace, the emperor handled state affairs on a daily basis. And it was also the part in which the imperial family lived.
紫禁城的总体部署啊，就是这样，用若干条纵深的轴线来安排这么多的建筑。那么这些建筑呢，都是用院落的形式来展开的。每个院落当中呢，都有成组的建筑，每栋建筑相互之间都是有主有从有正有配。它就是这样用这个建筑的手段来表达封建社会封建礼制所表达的那种等级和秩序。
Legend has it that Ziwei Palace of the Jade Emperor in Heaven has 10,000 bays of architecture, and it is also said that there are 9,999.5 bays in the Forbidden City on Earth. Over a period of more than 500 years, the Forbidden City has undergone constant changes, but according to a survey conducted by Palace Museum experts in 1973, there are in fact not 9,999.5, but 8,704 bays of architecture in the Forbidden City. Some people believe that when Emperor Shunzhi saw the Forbidden City for the first time, it was not intact. This is because of a memo presented to Emperor Shunzhi by Duo Argun, the Prince Regent, who had come to Beijing several months earlier than Emperor Shunzhi. In the memo, he told the emperor that Li Zicheng had escaped after setting fire to the palace.
李自成确实放火了，那紫禁城整个这个紫禁城受到什么损坏了？这个实际上清代人自己有一个定位。乾隆朝修订的《日暇旧闻考》就明确说过，紫禁城宫殿是因圣朝之旧而斟酌损益之。意思是什么呢？就是说我对紫禁城的修缮都是在明代建筑的基础上来进行的。这就反过来说明一个什么问题呢？就是说紫禁城宫殿没像传说的那样，因为李自成而受到那么大规模的破坏。
Every emperor hoped that the imperial family name would continue and bear many offspring, so as to make the dynasty prosperous and ensure that its rule of the country would last forever. In 1856, a baby girl became Empress Dowager Cixi, a woman who was to rule China for 48 years. The Palace of Preserved Elegance was her first residence after she entered the imperial palace. But the interior decoration we see now was made at a cost of 630,000 taels of silver in celebration of her 50th birthday. Orchids were regarded in ancient China as carrying the fragrance of a king, and also symbolized the birth of a baby boy. This pattern that combines the orchid and the longevity stone is believed to bring luck for the birth of a baby boy as well as longevity. It might be a coincidence that Empress Dowager Cixi was conferred with the title of Orchid Nobility, but before long she did give birth to Emperor Tongzhi and became even more powerful because of his son. The decoration of her sleeping palace became luxurious, with even dragons being displayed in her courtyard, the only case of this in the 6 eastern palaces and 6 western palaces. Before the days of Emperor Yongzheng, the Hall of Mental Cultivation in the inner palace used to be a commonplace. After Emperor Yongzheng ascended the throne, however, he did not follow the tradition that required the emperor to live in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, saying that he could not live in the palace where his father Emperor Kangxi had lived for more than 60 years. He decided instead to live in the Hall of Mental Cultivation outside the Gate of Lunar Glory, and required a simple renovation of the hall to be carried out. This decision by Emperor Yongzheng changed the pattern of the inner palace of the Forbidden City, and from that time on, the Hall of Mental Cultivation became more and more important. After this sudden rise in the status of the Hall of Mental Cultivation, it did not remain simple for long, as decoration soon followed. In the Forbidden City, an important standard to measure the status of a palace is whether it benefits from good sunlight or not. In order to improve the sunlight in the Hall of Mental Cultivation, it became the first hall in the Forbidden City to use glass. In the first year of the reign of Emperor Yongzheng, the construction department of the Imperial Household Department recorded the following in its Records of Carpentry Work. On the first day of the 10th month, an imperial edict was received and 2 pieces of glass were placed in the east and west windows in the north of the corridor of the rear sleeping chamber of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. At the time, glass was very rare indeed and had to be imported from overseas. The Hall of Mental Cultivation is close to the front palace of the Forbidden City, and so it has the function of combining the office and the resting place of the emperor together. The back half of the hall is his bedroom, the place where the emperor rested. But if he wanted to deal with state affairs, all he needed to do was to walk through this corridor to get to the front part of the hall, a walk that took less than a minute, and this greatly improved his efficiency. Starting from the reign of Emperor Yongzheng, 8 Qing dynasty emperors made the hall of mental cultivation their residence, as well as the place where they dealt with state affairs. And this was a practice that only came to an end when the Qing dynasty itself came to an end. This small palace witnessed the history of a dynasty, from its prosperity to its decline. In the Forbidden City, great importance was attached to maintaining hierarchy while retaining an atmosphere of grandeur and solemnity. However, there is one structure here that is totally different in style, one that is more lively and romantic. It is the Garden of the Palace of Peace and Longevity, commonly called the Qianlong Garden because it was the masterpiece of Emperor Qianlong, whose natural disposition was somewhat unconventional and who was fond of travelling. This narrow, long garden with winding paths that lead to secluded spots is located in the northeastern corner of the Forbidden City, and it comprises 4 separate courtyards which are interconnected, and the scenery in each courtyard is different. There is beautiful scenery representing the area south of the lower reaches of the Yangtze River, which Emperor Qianlong greatly admired during his inspection tours of the south, and from almost every angle we can see that the emperor was greatly influenced by the cultural tradition of the Han people. In ancient China, there was a sacrificial ceremony called Qishang, the purpose of which was to pray for blessings and get rid of inauspicious omens. Later, this practice evolved into a custom in which people went on an outing to the suburbs in late spring, and men of letters and scholars would invite each other to a gathering. The most famous event of this kind was recorded in Wang Shiju's Preface to Poems from the Orchid Pavilion. Clear water is flowing in the winding channel, and a wine cup goes down with the flowing water. If it stops before a man, he has to recite a poem or write an ode, and if not, he is made to drink as a forfeit. This is an account of a gathered crowd holding a Qishang sacrificial ceremony by a winding water channel while enjoying music, and it was according to this that Emperor Qianlong named the pavilion Qishang Pavilion. In this garden is the Three Friends Pavilion, a windowed lodge, the inside of which is decorated with pine trees, bamboos, and winter sweet. Pine trees are sturdy, tall, and straight. The winter sweet blossoms in winter despite the cold, while green bamboo stands straight and is hollow in the center. As all three can stand the bitter cold without withering, they are called the Three Friends in the Winter Cold. Ancient men of letters regarded these 3 plants as the symbols of integrity and nobility. Emperor Qianlong used the Three Friends Pavilion to express his cultural gentility. But more importantly, he wanted to show his intention, as Emperor of the Qing dynasty, of mixing with Han intellectuals and exchanging and sharing thoughts with them. The efforts made by the Qing dynasty from the reign of Emperor Kangxi over a period of 7 decades had paid off. By the reign of Emperor Qianlong, the population of China had exceeded 100 million for the first time in several thousand years, and there was plenty of silver in the treasury. It was in this period that China's overall national strength reached its zenith, and in which the agricultural economy also reached a very high level of development. Emperor Qianlong now began to direct the largest set of reconstruction projects the Forbidden City had seen since 1420. Among the projects, two were closely related to a change in the political system. The first one was the reconstruction of the Qian West Second Dwelling and the area surrounding it. The Qian West Second Dwelling had been the place Emperor Qianlong had lived as a young prince. So why, then, was he embarking upon a large-scale reconstruction of this site? In order to answer this question, we have to start with the imperial system of designating the crown prince. Before the time of Emperor Yongzheng, determining who was to be the crown prince often entailed fierce and bloody court struggles. Emperor Yongzheng changed this by making the method an entirely secret process. He wrote two testaments designating a successor to the throne himself. One was hidden behind the horizontal board inscribed with the characters meaning open and above board in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, and the other was carried by himself. Before the death of the emperor, this fact was kept a secret, and only after the emperor passed away could the two testaments be examined and checked. If the two were exactly the same, the heir to the throne could be publicized and preparation for the grand ceremony of enthronement could begin. Emperor Qianlong was the first emperor to become emperor by means of this secret system, and so before this he had not enjoyed the treatment of a crown prince. Because of this, he wanted to upgrade the status of Qian West Second Dwelling, his old residence, desiring to see it attain the status of a palace, one that no one would be allowed to live in. In this way, he thought his legitimacy to the throne would be reinforced. After the reconstruction, the main buildings in this three-line courtyard were renamed the Hall of Devoted Esteem, the Palace of Double Glory, and the Hall of Emerald Green Cloud, and together they were called the Palace of Double Glory. The name Palace of Double Glory had been proposed by Zhang Tingyu, a minister from the Han ethnic group. Double Glory referred to Shun, a wise monarch in ancient times, and Emperor Qianlong, who was very familiar with Han culture, very gladly accepted this proposal. After the reconstruction of Qian West Second Dwelling was completed, the buildings surrounding it were also reconstructed and became supporting facilities. Qian West First Dwelling, to its east, was changed into Study of Pure Fragrance, and a small stage was built inside it named Reserves of Ballads and Hymns, and this was used by the emperor for watching short items of performance. As well as this stage, a larger one was set up in the courtyard, and together these two stages were the first stages erected in the Forbidden City. After Emperor Qianlong ascended the throne, he lived in the Hall of Mental Cultivation, but always used the Palace of Double Glory as a good place for family gatherings as well as a place to entertain his ministers. Due to the fact that Emperor Qianlong was a follower of Tibetan Buddhism, he arranged for the construction of the most important piece of Tibetan Buddhist architecture in the Forbidden City, the Tower of Raining Flowers to the southwest of the Palace of Double Glory. Tibetan Buddhism was first introduced into the imperial palace during the Yuan dynasty, but reached its zenith in the Qing dynasty. The construction of the Tower of Raining Flowers was carried out on the one hand to meet the emperor's needs as a practitioner of Buddhism, but on the other hand, it had another more important function, maintaining good relations with the Mongols and Tibetans in the frontier regions of China, and strengthening the solidarity between different ethnic groups so as to consolidate the unity of the country as a whole. The second project completed during the series of renovations in the Forbidden City was one closely related to political reform, the Palace of Peace and Longevity. Soon after ascending the throne, Emperor Qianlong proclaimed, "In order not to surpass my grandfather, Emperor Kangxi, who reigned for 61 years, I will abdicate and hand over the throne to my son in the 60th year of my reign." This new method of handing over the throne meant that for the first time ever, a retired emperor would be living in the Forbidden City. The Palace of Peace and Longevity was a place for Emperor Qianlong to spend his remaining years after his retirement, and as the palace for the emperor's father, the rank of the Palace of Peace and Longevity was not to be inferior to the dwelling place of the emperor. The Palace of Peace and Longevity is divided into two parts. The front part is similar to the front palace, while the back part is the sleeping place, and there are all kinds of supporting facilities. It is like a miniature Forbidden City, and the cost of constructing the Palace of Peace and Longevity came to as much as 1.3 million taels of silver. The two gilded bronze lions standing in front of the gate of the palace alone contain